Hey folks, Chris here. Today we are talking about bass flies. Bass fishing is a ton of fun to do on a fly rod, whether it's smallmouth, largemouth, wherever you're at, Great Lakes, rivers, lots of fun all through the summer. One question that we ask by people just trying it out is, where do you start for flies? Bass, kind of like trout, have a really varied diet. They eat a lot of different stuff, which can be great because sometimes they aren't that choosy. Sometimes they can be a little choosy though. And when you're in the shop trying to pick flies, it can be a little overwhelming trying to figure out where to start. So to simplify things, what I would describe it as is try and think of it as breaking it down into 3 or 4 baskets of flies here. So bass eat a lot of bait fish. So that can be minnows like emerald shiners. It can be larger bait fish, can be other game fish like perch and bluegill, even smaller bass. If they can fit in their mouth, they will take a shot at. So other fish, which can loosely be described as bait fish patterns. So those can be larger flies like this one with big deer hair head. They can be smaller zonker style flies, something that might look more like a perch or a bluegill in this case. Clouser minnows. Small, slim body bait fish, terrific when you have smaller bait fish like shiners and smelt around. With bait fish, really just try and think of what fish are present in the water that you're fishing. So a lot of the time, there's only really 2 or 3 viable options for those fish to be feeding on. They aren't going to be feeding on all those fish I just named. So if you're in the Kawartha Lakes, they're probably eating perch and bluegill. If you're up, say, on the Great Lakes, it's probably shiners and gobies, so those little brown things that live on the bottom. If you're in rivers, a lot of the time it's sculpins, so the same sort of thing that trout are eating. So if you can even just do a quick Google search, what fish are in this lake, that will be a great starting point for what sorts of things those fish might feed on, and you can loosely imitate them based on the flies you're fishing. The second basket that we would talk about would definitely be crayfish. Crayfish are a super important food source for bass everywhere. Just about every water body that has bass is going to have crayfish. Crayfish, kind of like bait fish, can vary a lot though in their look. So sometimes you'll go even just down the street, one lake to the next, and you'll have a totally different color of crayfish around. You might go from an olive to sort of a rusty color to even darker shades like these. Crayfish oftentimes pick up the color of their surroundings to blend in, but really if you just poke around the rocks, you can usually find a couple and get a loose idea of what they look like. And if you match the color, you should be on the right start. Crayfish tend to hang around rocky areas where they can dig under the rock, or not dig under, but hide under the rocks to stay away from fish. So if you find rocky areas, that's usually a great place to start with crayfish patterns. And then one of everybody's favorites, of course, would be to fish topwater flies for bass. These are floating flies, so similar to how everybody loves dry flies for trout. These get big eats on the surface. They're very visual and fun to fish. And similarly, they can incorporate a few different food sources. So a lot of people default to thinking about frogs, and they're not wrong too when they're thinking of topwaters. So something like these freaky frogs that we really like, or a big popper that might look like a large frog singing in the lily pads. Those are awesome. But don't forget that other things can be on top of the water as well, including bait fish. So some flies like this wedgehead here, they have a slimmer profile that might be colored white like the belly of a minnow. And these can be a great imitation when you're fishing more open water areas where you're not going to find frogs, but you might find dying or distressed bait fish sitting on top of the surface. Smallmouth especially will roam those areas around points and things where minnows get washed up, and they'll gobble on these. You can also think about things like mice. Tons of fun, fish a little Moorish mouse like that. And one of our favorites over the last couple of seasons has been these. This is a fly called a Mr. Wiggly. It just looks like a big insect that fell into the water. And these are great when the water is calm, when you're fishing those back bays where you might have, say, a dragonfly or a big grasshopper that fell into the water. Bass love these, especially on calmer days. And then you have a couple of alternative or sort of lesser talked about food sources, but also very important. Leeches, especially if you're fishing like a cold front day where those bass are a little slower moving. Leeches, something you can fish slowly, really get in the face of those fish, do very, very well. So just a black woolly bugger or zonker like these. And nymphs. Depending on the lake or river that you're in, you may have some larger nymphs like hexagenias, big mayflies, which especially in the early summer months get very active swimming around, and bass, walleye, whitefish, all kinds of fish can key in on these. So carry just some big buggy looking nymphs as well, especially if fishing's slow and you can't figure out what they're eating, can definitely be worth a go. And if you want to simplify this even a little further, what you could do is forget about all these other flies and really just grab yourself a selection of woolly buggers. These really are the do-it-all fly, and you could make a whole box very nicely out of these. If you have a white one, that covers your bait fish. If you have an olive one, that covers your crayfish and some of your nymphs. And then if you have a black one, that covers your leeches. You can really make it that simple if you'd like. So grab a few flies, get out bass fishing. As always, if you need help figuring out where to go or what to fish, stop by the shop. We'll be happy to help you out. We'll see you on the water.